The doctor gives me until spring. Maybe not that. It suits me. A man should not carry a thing like this into a 51st year. And I have carried it through 50. My name is Asa Whitfield. In 1918, I was foreman at the Cane Creek camp in Harlan County, 40 years old, strong as a mule and twice as sure of myself. I'm telling you now because there is no one left to be hurt by it, and only me left to be judged. 7 of us walked into that hollow after the 2 children. 6 walked out. I will tell you what happened to the 7th. The 7th is the easy part. What I have never told anyone is why we came back without Eli and Sable, and why the thing at the water let us come back at all. The lantern is still lit. I'm looking at it now. I have measured timber 30 years, and a man who measures for a living learns not to lie in his figures, because the figures outlive him. Board feet, cord weight, pay owed against days worked. I'm telling you this so you know what kind of man is talking. I'm not a man who sees things. I'm a man who counts them. The camp sat in a fold of the mountains, 3 miles up from the Poor Fork. 41 men in the season of 1918. I could name every one and tell you what he was owed. We cut white oak and yellow poplar off the ridges and skidded it down to the splash dam, and it was hard, clean work. I knew the weight of a green log by looking at it. I knew how many feet a man could buck in a day and how many he would lie and claim. And I knew the difference. That is the whole art of running a camp numbers and the men who make them, and never letting either fool you. The influenza was in the low country that autumn, burying folks 3 to a grave. A mail rider up from Everett's told us the church there had run out of coffin boards, and the doctor had quit coming because there was nothing left to do but count. We shook our heads and went back to the timber and thought ourselves clever for living up where the sickness could not climb. We did not know the mountain kept its own accounts, and that being up high had not put us out of reach of dying, only in reach of a different kind. The 2 children came to us that spring. Their father, Coy Sutter, was a good, careful man who checked his own undercut twice, and a rolling log on the Blair grade killed him anyway in March of 1917. Their mother went a year later in the first wave out of Everett's, and I did not hear of it for 3 weeks. That left Eli Sutter, 9, and his sister Sable, 7, in a cold house with a neighbor woman who had 6 of her own and no room for 2 more. The county would have sent them to the poorhouse at Pineville or split them to whatever families wanted a child for the work. So I rode down myself and brought them up in the supply wagon, the 2 of them holding hands on the flour sacks and not saying a word the whole 3 miles. 41 men who had no business raising children decided among themselves that these 2 were ours. There was no vote. It was simply understood, and no man ever raised an objection. Eli was serious, old past his years, the way a boy gets when he has watched both parents into the ground before he is 10. He did not want to be looked after. He wanted to earn his keep, and he told me so his first week, hat in his hands like a grown man, asking for work, and it cost him everything to ask. I let him oil the cross-cut teeth and carry water. I paid him in real coin, a dime here, a quarter there, and he saved every cent in a tobacco tin with a schooner on the lid and never told me what it was for. I found out later. I would rather I had not. Sable was all light where he was all shadow. She sang the pieces of the few songs she knew, over and over, in a high, crooked little voice, and a camp of hard men learned those broken songs against their will. She named the mules. She had a gap where her front teeth had been and was not shy about it. And she would smile that gap-toothed smile at the roughest man in camp, and he would go soft as bread in milk and be ashamed and do it again the next day. The lantern was theirs. Hold on to that. Everything comes back to the lantern. An ordinary kerosene lantern, brass and glass, $1.50 in any store in the county. I gave it to the 2 of them and made it their chore. Every evening at dusk, Eli filled it and trimmed the wick, and Sable lit it and clapped her hands when the flame took, every single evening, as though she had performed a small miracle. I suppose she had. A camp is a frightening place to come home to in the black of a mountain night, all shapes and no edges. Men have walked off ledges in the dark up here. That one small light told 40 men where the world was. It said, "Here is the fire, here is the food, here is the place you are trying to reach." The children never missed an evening, in any weather, and they were prouder of it than of anything, because 40 men depended on it. They had a place. They had 41 fathers. It was, I think, the happiest they had been since their people died, and I let myself believe we had made it right. They had been with us 7 months when they went into the hollow. 7 months. And I had started thinking about winter and schooling and what a man does about a girl child as she grows with no woman in a camp of 40 men. I had started thinking like a father without ever once saying the word. I loved those 2 children. I never told them so. There would be time, I told myself. A thing that true did not need saying yet. Time does not owe you the second half of a sentence. I learned that late. On the morning of the 19th of October, I woke before the cook's bell and knew, before I was full awake, that the camp was wrong. Not quiet, silent. A logging camp is never quiet, even sleeping. 40 men breathing and coughing, the mules stamping in the pole barn, the jays coming down in the gray light to fight over scraps at the cook shack door. Every morning of my life in that camp had begun with the jays. That morning they did not come. I lay listening the way you listen for a clock you have just noticed has stopped. And under the missing jays, I could hear the blood in my own ears. And the frost stood thick on the inside of the glass, a deep December frost. Furred and white, after a week so mild the men had worked the south ridge in shirt sleeves. It had no business being there. I felt the wrongness in my chest before my mind would take it up. And I told myself the season had turned hard in the night. A man who counts things is very good at explaining a number he does not like. Remember that. I was the worst offender of all of us. The children slept behind a blanket we had strung on a wire in the corner of the cook shack. I looked in on them every morning before anything else put my head around the blanket, counted my 2, and let the day start. That morning, the blanket was pushed aside. The 2 straw ticks empty and cold. Cold as if no warm body had lain there for hours. And the quilts were folded. Not thrown back the way a child throws back a quilt. Folded square at the foot of each tick, the way Sable folded them each morning as her chore, which meant either they had never slept there, or they had risen in the dead of night and made their beds neat before they left. I did not know which was worse. I still do not. Their coats were gone. Eli's boots, Sable's shoes, the tobacco tin and every coin in it, and the lantern off its hook outside, though I did not notice that until later, because a man does not count the things that are always there until the morning they are not. I did not raise the camp at once, and that is the kind of thing a man does not forgive himself. I walked the yard alone first, telling myself they were at the spring, that Eli had taken his sister up to the point to watch the sun clear the far ridge. 9 mornings out of 10, a missing child is at the privy or asleep in the hay, and a man who runs shouting at every empty bed is a fool. But the 10th morning comes to every man who lives long enough, and it had come to me. Boone Sizemore found the shoe. Boone was my best tracker, near 70, who had hunted these mountains all his life and his father's before him, and could read a hillside like a page of print. He came back up from the head of the skid trail and said nothing, only pointed with his chin, and 40 feet down the trail stood one of Sable's shoes, upright, laced, set flat on the frozen mud, both laces tied, as though she had stepped out of it and walked on. A child running from something does not leave a shoe standing upright and laced. She kicks it off sideways into the brush. This one had been set down untied, loosened, slipped off, stood upright on the cold ground by a child in no hurry and afraid of nothing, and then she had walked on downhill in bare feet, away from the camp, away from us. I picked it up, cold all the way through, which meant hours. I put it inside my coat against my chest, where it stayed 3 days. I have it yet. 7 of us went in. I want their names because they earned them. And I am the last man alive who carries them. Myself. Boone Sizemore, near 70, who had never once been wrong about a trail in 50 years and was about to be wrong about the only one that mattered, and knew it and could not help it. My brother-in-law, Seth Hall, 38, the steadiest man I ever knew. The Muncie brothers, Doss and Landon, who cut more timber between them than any 4 other men in camp. Old preacher Ratliff, who led the Sunday singing and had the voice for it. And the youngest, a boy of 19 we called Little Ace, whose widowed mother I had promised to look after him as my own. 7 of us, 2 children ahead in the trees, walking calm into a cold hollow, carrying their light. Boone put us on the trail inside an hour, and the first thing he read there did not make sense, and it frightened me worse than any sign of struggle could have. The children had walked. Boone knelt over the prints longer than I'd ever seen him stay over sign, moving down on his knees, touching the edges, laying his own hand flat for the size. When he stood, his face had changed, and Boone Sizemore was not a man whose face changed. 2 sets, he said. The boys and the girls. The girl barefoot now, her tread lighter on the cold side. Side by side, even spacing, even weight. No running, no stumbling, no dragging, no scuffing, no place where one of them balked and had to be pulled. Nobody carried them, and nobody chased them. He looked back up the trail toward camp, then down toward the dark of the hollow, and he said it plain. They walked the way you'd walk to church, like they had some place to be and time to get there. Children who are taken do not walk. Children who are lost do not walk a straight, even line toward the deepest, coldest, darkest part of a hollow in the black of night. Every instinct pulls the other way, toward the light and the voices and the warmth. These 2 had gone downhill into the timber, calm, and they had carried the lantern between them. There was a place near the head of the trail where they had set it down a moment and scorched a ring in the frozen leaf mat, then picked it up and gone on. Their light carried into the dark on purpose, toward something, or with someone. Here is how a man who counts things handles a fact he cannot bear. He hunts for a second fact that lets him drop the first. Boone gave me one, and I think even as he said it, he did not believe it. There was a 3rd track. It came in off the ridge, crossed the children's line, and ran alongside it, keeping to the harder ground and the leaf mat where it left the least, the way a man walks the edge of a plowed field to keep from sinking. A big track. Boone crouched and measured it against his own spread hand, and it was wider and longer, and it sank deep where the children's prints had barely marked the same ground. Weight. Real weight. More than any of the 7 of us carried. He set his hand flat inside the print and did not quite reach the edges with his fingers. Then he stood and said, in a voice working hard to sound like his own, "It's a bear. A big boar bear. Come down in the night, driving them ahead of it." I took the word with both hands. A bear I could understand. A bear I could shoot. A bear had a name and a weight and a season. And a bear driving 2 children down a hollow in the dark was the worst horror I could stand there and think of. But it was a horror shaped like the world I knew. It had edges. It could be ended. I said, then we get our children back from the bear. And we checked our loads and went on. And God forgive me, I was almost grateful. Because a bear meant an ordinary reason. And I could bear an ordinary reason. I could not yet bear the other kind. But the other count ran in the back of my head, quiet and patient. The way a bad number runs when you have added a column wrong and your hand knows before your eye does. A bear driving children scatters them, panics them, runs them to ground. These children had not run not one running step in 3 miles. And the big track did not weave and close the distance the way a hunting bear's would. It kept off to the side, a little ahead, kept to the hard ground on purpose. A bear does not care if it is red. A bear does not know what reading is. Whatever walked beside my 2 children had known men would come, and had walked so as to tell them nothing. I said none of that. I let Boone have his bear because I wanted it more than he did. We all did. 7 armed men going down into a cold, silent hollow, each one holding the word bear like the rail on a dark stair, and not one of us willing to look over the side and see how far down it went. At the bottom of the first hollow, on a bench above the creek, an old woman lived alone. Hettie Combs, born in that cabin, buried a husband and 2 grown sons out of it, and she knew that stretch of mountain the way I knew my own ledgers. A granny woman, she birthed the babies and laid out the dead, and knew which root stopped a fever and which stopped a heart. I will not have her spoken of the way some of the men spoke of her that day. She had the whole thing right from the first, and she paid for the knowing with 50 years of being called an old fool. I let her be called it. That is one more thing on the list I carry. She was standing in her open door when we came down, as though she had been waiting, which she had sound carries in a hollow. A small bent woman in a man's coat and a black headscarf, standing very straight for all that she was bent. She looked at the 7 of us with our rifles, then at my chest, where the shape of Sable's shoe pushed against my coat, and she knew. I saw her know it. Before any of us said a word, she said, "You're after the 2 little ones." I said we were. A bear had driven them down in the night, I said, and we meant to have them back before dark. She did not laugh. Of all of us, she was the only one who did not reach for something to make it smaller. Doss Muncie muttered about old women and their tales, loud enough to be heard, meant to be. Little Ace grinned his sick, frightened grin. Landon studied his boots the way a man does when he has decided in advance that whatever comes next is beneath him. She did not argue either, and that was what reached me, because liars and fools argue, and she did neither. She waited out the muttering, and then she spoke to me alone, because she had marked me for the one in charge, and would not waste true words on men who had already decided not to hear. "There is no bear in this hollow," she said. "There has not been in my lifetime, nor my mother's, and you will not find one no matter how far down you go, because the bears know better than you men and keep out. The thing at the water, at the ford where the creek widens, has been there longer than my people, and longer than the people before mine, whose stone marks are still up on the ridges. It does not belong to the church, and it does not belong to the old tales. It is older than both." And then she said the thing I have carried 50 years, and I will give it to you as near as I still hear it. And I hear it very near. "It keeps," she said. "It don't kill. In all my years, in all my mothers, it has never once been hungry. And that is the thing you men cannot get down into your heads. Because a man can only fear a thing that wants to eat him. It keeps what crosses the water to it. If those babies walk down to the ford on their own 2 feet, unforced, then they have crossed, and there is no bringing them back, because that is not how it goes, and never once has been. Go down and stand on the near bank and grieve. It will let you, but you cannot go across. And here is the thing you will not take as comfort now, if you are a fool and try. It will not eat you, either. It will only turn you round and set you back on your own side. So go see the water, since you won't believe an old woman, and then be glad it turns you round, and go home to the living." Doss Muncie said, "We'll see about that," and shifted his rifle so she could watch him do it. She looked at him the way you look at a child who has announced he will hold his breath until he flies. "You'll see about nothing, son." She said it so plainly, with so little heat, that he had no answer and looked away, and that was worse for him than any curse. Then she looked back at me, and her face had gone almost gentle the way you're gentle with a man you can see is about to be hurt and cannot be stopped. "Keep hold of that light they carried," she said. I must have shown my not understanding, because she nodded at the air. "The lantern. It is the last thing of theirs that will cross that water and come back the only thing. And when you find it, keep hold of it, because it will tell you where the line is. A man who knows where the line is can stop himself at it. Most men can't. Most men don't know the line is there until they're across it. I did not understand that, about the light telling me where the line was. It made no sense to a man who counts things. I would understand it all the way to the ground before dusk. I did not laugh at Hettie Combs, but I did not believe her either, and that is worse, because to laugh is at least to choose. I stood in the middle, believing nothing, dismissing nothing, keeping my options open as if my carefulness could hold the world in place. She was very likely an old woman with old tales, and I could not stop thinking about the big track that kept to the hard ground so it would not be red, and the December frost, and the missing jays, and a shoe set upright by a child afraid of nothing. My numbers were not adding, and it frightened me worse than any bear, because a bear is in the world, and a wrong sum is in the foundations of it. We thanked her. She did not answer. The last I saw of her, looking back once as the trail bent, she had her hand up, not waving, only held up, palm out, the way you hold up your hand to say a thing you already know will not be heard, to a back already walking away. The hollow was longer and deeper than any of us had reckoned, longer than any map I had seen of that country, and the light went early down in the bottom while sun still stood on the ridges. Boone would not push the trail in the black. He said we would blunder past the children in the timber and never know it. So we made a cold camp on a bench above the creek, and we did not sleep. I will set down what that night was, because it is where the ordinary world let go of me, one finger at a time, until I held nothing at all. The silence came first. All day we had heard the world thinned, but there the creek, the wind in the poplar tops, once a squirrel scolding. As the dark came on, the sounds went out one at a time, like a man walking through a house blowing out lamps room by room. First the birds, then the wind, which still stirred the treetops, but stirred them without a sound, as if the air had gone thick and would not carry noise. Then the creek itself, still running silver at the edge of the firelight, but running with no voice, so that the fire's small crackle was the loudest thing in the world, and every man was listening past it without admitting it. Into that silence came the breathing. I will be careful here, because this is where a man loses his listener, and I have lost a few and stopped telling it to any but the ones who earned it. I give you only what 6 grown men, all armed, all sober, all raised to these woods, agreed on afterward, without one leading another, because we compared it later, careful, the way you check a sum from the bottom up. We heard breathing, slow, deep, far too deep and slow for any of us, and too large, a great slow bellows of a breath, with a size to it your own body understood and shrank from before your mind could say why. And it moved. It went around us, out past the last reach of the firelight, in a great slow circle, unhurried, all the way around the 7 of us and back and around again, for hours. In all those hours, it never once came inside the light, and it never once made the sound of a footfall. Sit with that. A thing that large should break sticks, roll stones, drag through the brush, announce itself with every step. This made no sound but the breath. It circled us half the night on ground, littered with dry sticks and loose stone, and did not snap one twig. And that silent, enormous circling was worse than any roar, because a roar is a thing an animal does, and this was not that. This was intention. It let us hear exactly what it chose, and nothing more. Once, on the cold air, a smell came in under the breath-wet stone, old fur, and under both something like the breath of a cave that has never in all the ages held a man. Every hair on my body stood, because it was the smell of a place not meant for me. Little Ace began to cry, quiet, biting down on it. I did not shame him, and I let no other man shame him, because I wanted to do the same, and only my 40 years and my place kept me from it. Preacher Ratliff prayed, low and fast, running every prayer he knew together. And Seth, the steadiest man I ever knew, leaned to my ear and said the thing all 6 of us were reaching for. "It's a bull elk, Asa. In rut, they'll blow like that and circle and never come in." We grabbed the elk the way we had grabbed the bear, the way a falling man grabs a branch. And I set it back, sure, a bull elk, because it was my job to hand the men something to hold. But I sat with my rifle across my knees and watched the dark. And I understood the thing Hettie Combs had handed me in words, and I had refused. It was not hunting us. A thing meaning to kill 7 men had all that long night and the dark and the silence to do it. And I had no doubt it could take us one at a time, out of the firelight, and we would not stop it with all our rifles. It did not. It circled and breathed and let us feel, deliberately, how easily it could come in among us, and then chose, hour after hour, not to. It was not stalking. It was showing us. It was letting us learn in our bodies the one thing the old woman had put in words. Our lives were not what was at issue. We were not worth the trouble of harm. Toward gray, the breathing stopped, not faded, not moved off, simply gone between one of my own breaths and the next. The creek found its voice, then a single bird high up, and I understood we had been let alone all night on purpose. Stepped around the way you step around a nest of something small rather than through it, not from fear, not from tenderness, but from an indifference so complete it had room in it for a terrible gentleness. We were beneath its concern. It had sized me correctly and set me aside without effort, and I have never gotten all the way out from under it since. I do not expect to before spring. Of everything in that hollow, it is the breathing I still hear when the house goes quiet, not the end. The breathing, going slow around a small fire all night and never coming in. We came down to the ford on the morning of the 20th, and there the world I had lived in 40 years ended, and I have lived just to the side of it since. The creek widened into a shallow, rocky ford, ankle deep over clean gravel, near 20 feet across, and on the far side, the timber stood back and changed. I have cut timber all my life, and never seen its like great old trunks wider than 2 men could reach around. No undergrowth between them, no brush, no saplings, no deadfall. The ground beneath swept clean and brown and open as a church floor, running back into a dimness the eye could not follow. It told you it was a boundary before your mind could find the reason. The near bank was our world, tangled and cold. The far bank was not. Every one of the 7 of us stopped at the water's edge together, without a word, the way men stop at the door of a sick room. And out in the middle of the ford, on a broad flat stone standing a hand's height above the water, the children's lantern was burning. Hold still with me. This is the stone the rest is built on. That lantern had been gone off its hook 2 full days and 2 nights, carried 3 miles down a cold hollow, stood out through 2 nights, one wet with a heavy dew that beaded silver on every leaf around it. No reservoir made by any hand burns 2 days on one filling, and I filled that lantern myself and knew to the hour how long it ran. No wick survives that dew, that night wind. And it was burning, steady, a clean small flame standing straight up with no waver, though I felt the morning air moving cold on my face and moving everywhere else in that hollow. Square and level and deliberate, set down by careful hands exactly halfway across, exactly on the line between the near bank and the far. And it burned as though lit a minute before, as though Sable had just clapped her hands at the catching of it. Boone read the near bank in the wet sand, and his hands were not steady now. The children had waded out to the stone, the 2 sets of small tracks going out. The girl barefoot on both feet now, her one shoe 3 miles behind against my chest, and set the lantern down. And then the small tracks went on off the far side of the stone, through the last of the shallows, up onto the swept brown ground under the ancient trees. And there they stopped, not turned back, stopped, as if the ground itself would take no more mark, as if my 2 children had walked up out of the water onto that swept floor and passed clean out of the reach of any sign a man could read. Beside the small barefoot prints in the sand of the far bank was the big track, many of them now. I read them the way Boone read them, and I understood in my body, before my mind would take it how they lay. The thing had come down out of its own country to the water and met the children at the stone, at the line, and then gone up the far bank with them, ahead of them, the way a man goes ahead of a guest to hold the branch and show the path. Not driving, not herding, leading. It had led my 2 children up out of the water onto its own swept ground and left their lantern burning behind them on the stone, exactly on the line. And Hettie Combs' voice came up in me plain as if she stood at my shoulder. It will tell you where the line is. The lantern was the line. The children had carried their light 3 miles into the dark and out to the last stone that was still ours, and there set it down, and there crossed, and the light stayed to mark the place. Whether some part of Eli, careful, precise, thinking of the men who walked toward a light in the dark, had set it there on purpose so we would stop at it, I will never know. I have wanted to know that one thing above almost any other, and it is on the list of what will not close. We were not going to bring them home. I understood it the way you understand a killing frost, not by argument, all at once in the body. Sable's shoe was cold against my chest and would not warm. I looked across at the swept ground where 2 sets of small prints went up out of the water and stopped. And everything in me that had spent 7 months learning without permission how to be a father to those 2 stood up at once and howled to go across. I did not decide to. My body decided. I put one boot into the cold water of the ford, and the far side of the hollow moved. Not all of it moved. That is what I have never been able to make a living soul truly feel. A part of the dark under those old trees, a part I had taken, without thinking, for a trunk, or the shadow between 2 trunks, came loose from the rest of the dark and was suddenly separate, and stood, and rose. And in the standing of it, I understood it had been there the whole time, through Boone's reading of the sand, through my understanding about the light, standing perfectly still in the dim under its own trees, watching 7 small men come down to the edge of its water. And it was tall, tall past anything I had a place for. I could not see it whole. I want that set down plainly, because the men who did not believe me always wanted me to say I had wanted the clean full picture they could then decide was a lie. And I never gave it to them because I never had it. It stood back in a light I have never seen the like of before or since. A yellowish-green light that did not seem to fall from the sky, but rise from the deep of the hollow. And it came only part way forward out of that light. And what came forward was more than a man can carry the rest of his life. The eyes came first, set high, higher than a tall man's, higher than a bear's at its full, up in the dark where no animal's eyes have business being. And they took the small flame of the lantern and threw it back red, not the flat, cold shine of a deer caught in a light, but a deep red, a coal red with a bottom to it. 2 of them, level, turned full on us with an attention I had never in 40 years been the object of. The attention of a thing that saw me entirely and was not troubled by what it saw. Then a shoulder came forward as it shifted its weight black, sloped, enormous. The fur on it matted and wet-looking, though it had not been in the water, hanging in ropes. Then, lo, one hand came forward and down. I call it a hand because it is the truest word I have, though it hung too long off too long an arm and ended wrong, in claws that held the light along their edges. It came down and rested, easy, against the trunk of one of the great trees, the way a man rests his hand on the top rail of a fence he built and owns, and has leaned on 10,000 evenings. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed that I could hear. I looked at Boone, near 70, who had had a right name for every track in 3 miles, who had given us the bear and held to it 2 days, because it was all he had, and Boone had let his rifle down. The muzzle pointed at the sand. His old hands had gone loose, and his face, I'd known that man 20 years and never seen it. I'd do what it did then. It let go. Everything a life of being right about the woods had built up in it. Let go at once. And what was left underneath was just an old man looking at a thing his whole life had never prepared him for. Seeing his face, I knew the last of the ordinary world had let go of the last of us. There was no elk. There was no bear. There had never been a bear. There was only this, standing on its own ground, on the far side of a line my children had crossed of their own small feet, older than the church and the tails and the stone marks on the ridges. And it was looking, out of all 7 of us, at me, and it did not come across. Mark that above everything. It stood at its own bank with the water between us, and it could have crossed no doubt, none, that it could have been among us in 3 of its strides, in less time than it takes to say, and it did not. It only stood, half out of its light, one clawed hand on its tree, red eyes level and full on me, and waited to see what 7 small trespassing men would do at the edge of its water, with the light of the 2 lost children burning small and steady on the stone between. And Doss Muncie, God rest him, God forgive him, God forgive the whole 7 of us, and me first of all, raised his rifle. I have come to the part I have never told. I told all the rest, in pieces, over the years, to the few who would sit for it and had earned it. This part I always kept back, always stopped just short of. I give it to you now, whole, because I'm dying by spring, and it is the only thing I still own worth handing on. Doss fired, and the shot in that dead silence was the mountain splitting open, and I saw the ball strike home. It took the thing in the great black shoulder. I saw the fur move with it, and I saw it do nothing. No stagger, no flinch, no cry, no roar, no turning. Nothing, as if Doss had fired into the living side of the ridge. Then all of us fired. I will not stand at my end and pretend I did not. Every man but Boone brought his rifle up in that one animal instant when Doss's shot did nothing. And we fired into the far bank, into the eyes and the shoulder and the dark shape, and reloaded with shaking hands and fired again. And the hollow filled with white smoke and thunder that had nowhere to go between the steep walls, and came back on us, doubled. I fired too, twice, into a thing my 2 children had walked up to, calm of their own feet, and been led away by gentle into the dark. I fired because I was more afraid than I have ever been, and because a man like me knew only one thing to do with a grief that size: push it out through the barrel of a gun. And it took the shots, took every one the way that flat stone took the running water, and did not fall, did not so much as sway. And when the smoke thinned, I saw it was closer. It had crossed. Not in anger. I have gone over that moment 10,000 nights in 50 years, and there was no anger in it. Never once anything I could name as anger. It had simply crossed the water while 7 men emptied their guns into it, unhurried. And it came up out of the ford, rising and rising as it came. Taller than I had let myself understand, even seeing the eye set so high, up and up to its full height in the middle of the creek, with the white water running around its legs, and the children's lantern burning small and steady at its very feet. It rose over us. It filled the whole narrow sky of that hollow. Its head went back, its mouth came open, and every tooth in it took the lantern light at once. And this is where every man, who ever heard me tell it, braced for the killing. There was no killing. Little Ace fell. The boy I had promised his mother, 19 years old, went straight down and back into the shallows beside the burning lantern. And he threw up one hand. I see it yet. I will see it when I go. That one bare hand thrown open against the thing standing over him, and he did not scream. He made a small sound, low, the sound a much younger child makes, and I had given his mother my word. And the thing bent down over him. It bent its whole great height down over the boy lying back in the water, its head close over him, close enough that its breath moved the wet hair on his brow, close enough that one closing of that long clawed hand would have finished him without effort, without thought. And it stopped. It held there, bent over him, and the whole world stopped with it. Then it lowered one hand, the long hand, the wrong fingers, the claws that had caught the light, and it did not strike, and it did not take. It set the flat of that hand, palm and not claw, against the boy's chest, gentle as you would settle a spooked colt, gentle as a thing that has done this before and knows exactly how much weight to use. And it pressed him back, down and back, into the shallows, away from itself, toward our bank, toward the side that was ours. Stay, it was telling him, without one word in it, in a language older than words and plainer than any. Stay on your own side. It pressed the boy back across the line into the country of the living. And the whole while, its red eyes were not on the boy at all. They were on me. Across all of it, the smoke, the water, the boy in the shallows. It was looking at me, and had been the whole time. I have spent 50 years trying to name what was in that look, and the nearest I will ever come is this. It was the look you give a man whose grief you understand entirely and cannot do one thing to help. It had my children. It was not sorry the way a person is sorry. It was something older than sorry, on the far side of sorry, the way it was on the far side of anger. It had led two small ones who had already lost every other thing up out of the water onto its own ground, because they had crossed of their own free feet. And it kept them now, and it would not give them back, and it would not take the other 6 of us for the asking, and it would not even suffer us to throw our own foolish lives across the line after them. It set the boy back gently on our side. It stood to its full and terrible height. It looked at me one moment longer, meant for me, and no other. And then it turned, unhurried, and went back up the far bank into the swept dark under the ancient trees, the way it had gone with the children, and the dim closed behind it, the way still water closes over a dropped stone, without a ring, without a mark, as though it had never been. We stood in the drifting smoke. Little Ace lay in the ford and wept like the child he had almost stopped being. And the lantern burned on its stone, steady and small and straight, exactly on the line, marking the last place that was ours. We did not go across. Every man of the 6 understood we could have. It would not have stopped us with harm. It would only have turned us round, gentle, the way the old woman said, and set us back on our side like it had set the boy, and not one of us could bear to try. I have turned it every way a man can for 50 years, and I have never once decided whether our not trying was cowardice, plain, or the only wisdom any of us showed in that whole hollow the sense. At last, too late to stop at a line an old woman told us was there. I waded out to the stone and took the lantern up with my own hand. And I could not have told you why, except that Hettie Combs said keep hold of the light, and it was the last thing of theirs I could still reach, and I could not leave it burning alone out there in the dark. It did not go out when I lifted it. It did not go out when the cold wind of the high hollow struck it on the climb. It did not go out on the 3 long miles home, though I gave it no oil and trimmed it no wick, and did nothing but carry it. It burned the whole way. It has burned ever since. I put Sable's cold shoe back against my chest. I carried the light. And the 6 of us went home and left my 2 children on the far side of the water, kept. 7 of us walked into Sutter Hollow after the 2 children. 6 walked out. I said I would tell you plainly what happened to the 7th, and that it was the easy part, and here it is. Doss Muncie, who fired the first shot, took a fever on the walk home that same night and never shook it, and was in the ground beside the cook shack before the month was out. The doctor called it the influenza, the same that was emptying the low country, and I let him write it down that way. And it may even be the truth. I have never been sure. That is the whole of the seventh. And he is not the mystery. I told you at the start he would not be. The mystery is the other subtraction, and it does not resolve, and I will not lie to you at the end and say it does. 2 children walked down into that hollow on their own 2 feet, calm, unforced, carrying their own small light into the dark. And they crossed a water that men are permitted to stand beside and grieve at and not to cross. And they did not come back. And they are not coming back. And I do not know, to this hour, what it is to be kept instead of killed. I have decided, at my end, that I am glad I do not know. Hettie Combs said it keeps, it does not kill. It has never once been hungry. And she was right about every word. And men called her a fool for 50 years, some of them men, who had stood in that ford beside me and seen it with their own eyes. And she was the only one of us who was never wrong, not once. From the first word she spoke in her door, I have thought every thought a man can think about that far bank, that they suffered, that they did not, that whatever is up under those old trees is a horror past imagining, or a mercy past understanding, or only a place older than our fear of it, and with no more feeling toward us than a mountain has, that took in 2 children who had already lost every single thing a child can lose, and kept them somewhere the flu could not reach, and no log could ever roll. I do not know which. I have made what peace I'm going to make with never knowing, because the only way left to try was to put my boot in the water again. And I've known since I was 40 that the water would only turn me round, gentle, and set me back on my own side. And I would have learned nothing and lost the last of the light besides. The county wrote 14 words in a book somewhere. Lost to exposure, search abandoned after 3 days. I let those stand too. There was no line on any form for the truth, and no man in any office who would have carried it. And as the years went by, I found I did not want it carried by any man but me. Some weights a man does not set down. He carries them until he is the thing being carried. The lantern is in a wooden box in my attic, and Sable's one shoe beside it, and the lantern is lit. It has been lit for 50 years, with no oil ever put in it and no wick ever trimmed, and it will be lit when spring comes, and I'm not here to climb up and look at it. I go up and sit with it some nights, more now than I used to. It is the last thing of theirs left in the world, and it still burns straight and small and steady, and it still marks the line. I am nearer to that line now than I have been since I stood in the cold water of the ford with an empty rifle in my hands, and I find, to my own surprise, that I'm not afraid of it. I have caught myself wondering these last few nights whether when I come to cross my own dark water there will be a small light set down for me at the edge of it, burning, straight and steady, put there by careful hands, to show me the place and to show me which way the 2 of them went. 7 men, 2 children, 6 of us home, 1 light that will not go out. I have finally said all of it. Now I can go.